This is a Datsun 120a F2 Coupe, which is a bit of a mouthful, so most people in Britain just call it a Datsun Cherry. They were built back in the mid to late 1970s. This particular one is a 1978 model, making her 32 years old. The F2 came in 4 different body types. There was the 2-door and 4-door saloon, the estate car, and then this coupe version, which is the only one I actually like because I thought the weird back end looked sort of futuristic.
But I suppose the real question, of course, is why have I actually got it? Well,
many years ago, back in the 1980s, my younger self needed to learn to drive, but unfortunately only liked 2 cars. One car turned out to be called a Lamborghini Countach, but it turned out to be rather expensive. The other car was called a Datsun Cherry, and it turned out to be surprisingly cheap second hand, so I bought one and learnt to drive. I had this car for years and absolutely loved it, and it never let me down. Well, apart from when the brakes failed, or the subframe collapsed, or it just didn't start. Luckily, my father was an engineering expert and always on hand with a seemingly inexhaustible supply of tools, and was therefore able to repair it and get it back on the road. Until finally it broke down once too often and was gone.
but I guess you never forget your first car, and 20 years later I realised that it was the only one that I'd really liked, so I went and bought another one. And just in time too, because there are hardly any left in the country. When I bought the car, it didn't look like this. What you are seeing is the results of 2.5 years of hard work and several £1,000s in repairs and spare parts, including managing to find a mint condition bonnet, rear hatch and chrome bumpers that had lain hidden in a lockup for over 25 years.
Well, it was certainly a thrill to be sitting inside one of these cars again after so many years, but it was also a little bit of a shock, because obviously my memory isn't quite as good as it used to be. The Datsun's not a particularly big car, but it seems much smaller than I remember it, and things are much closer to me. For instance, this windscreen, compared to a modern car, almost seems in your face, and this big old steering wheel takes a bit of getting used to. But then again, there's no power steering in these cars, so I guess you need it. And the doors seem very close to me. I think one of the first things I usually do is wind the window down so I can get my arm out. None of this motorised rubbish here. We've got a good old manual winder. There's an awful lot of black plastic and vinyl in this car, but I'm not really complaining. Some of the cars had a much lighter interior, but I think that didn't look as good. Black usually cleans up quite well and looks quite smart. One of the things I always liked about the car was the design of the dashboard, with these great big chunky surrounds to the dials. It all seems very dramatic and a bit OTT. Especially for this dial that just contains a single handbrake light. Space-wise, we're not too bad at the front for the driver and the passenger, but back here in the rear seats it's just a little bit too cramped for me. I think even a child would struggle. Luckily there's plenty of room in the boot. Well, considering how big that glass was, you really can't see much in the rearview mirror, which was always a slight problem. We've only got 4 gears in this car, operated by this old-fashioned great long gear stick. And speaking of old-fashioned, we've even got a choke control knob, something I've not used for years. Help get the engine started. Talking of which, let's have a look at it. Well, here it is, and I think the first thing that sort of strikes you is how clean and bright everything is. There is of course a good reason for this. Normally, of course, a car engine looks like this, but I find this all rather confusing because it's just one big mass of dark, black, oily parts. So now everything's cleaned and painted, and I can tell what's what, which is a big help for someone like me who's not a mechanic. Unfortunately, the original engine was faulty, but instead of repairing it I simply pulled it out and put a replacement one in. But typical for my luck, that one turned out to be faulty too, so I ended up dismantling both and making one engine that worked. So, I guess we should take it for a drive. Well, generally speaking, it drives pretty well, but these 1970 brakes take a bit of getting used to. There's a fair amount of noise in these old cars. The soundproofing's not that great. There's a fair amount of road noise, engine noise, wind noise, exhaust noise, even the dashboard rattles. But I guess that's all part of the fun, isn't it?
While driving these cars is a lot of fun, there's more to it than just the driving. Being a classic car owner brings you into contact with a whole new social circle, and there are many places where you can go to meet other proud owners to talk about wheels, overhead camshafts, big ends, and brake calipers to your heart's content. All marvellous stuff. Of course, throughout all of this, you are always safe in the knowledge that your car is clearly the best, even if other people may have, say, an Aston Martin, or a Lotus, or maybe a Ferrari. At the end of the day, nothing can compare to a Datsun Cherry. So there you have it, an example of 1970s Japanese automotive excellence, or just a piece of old tat. I guess it all depends upon your point of view. Personally, I still love this car. This one's been around now for 32 years, and I hope she lasts for a great many years to come.